welcome back to Book Chats from Lonzo Public Library. As you may know, this is Women's History Month. Yay, Women's History. So today I'm going to talk about some of our books for kids about women's history. Um, because history, it's easy to think of it as boring, dusty old dates, and that is completely wrong. What it is, it's the stories of people who shaped the world that we live in now. And sometimes the women get forgotten, so it's good to make sure we hear their stories too. I hope that you and your kids regularly visit our juvenile nonfiction section because there's lots of good stuff on many topics, not just history. Keep in mind, we also have early reader history, nonfiction, easy for me to say. And then the big section is sort of the equivalent of chapter books. And then we also have young adult and then adult because we like to learn about stuff too. So I'm going to start with She Persisted by Chelsea Clinton, which is it's just an overview. As you can see, it's really a picture book with great illustrations and just very short little paragraphs that introduce you to some great women from history. It's a good place to start with younger kids. She talks about leaders in civil rights, science, sports, the arts, everybody from Helen Keller to Maria Tallchief. So that's a great one. And if you do visit our nonfiction section, you're probably familiar with the Who Was series, they're fantastic. They're just cute little books. They're very readable. They're written at about a 4th grade level. And we have lots and lots of different topics, including, not surprisingly, some great American women. So we're going to talk about just a few of my favorites. Harriet Tubman was a slave who escaped, which is, of course, a dangerous and scary thing to do. But then rather than just living happily in the North, she went back again and again and helped other people escape from slavery. Some of them were her family and some of them were complete strangers. And then when the Civil War broke out, she was a spy and a soldier. So amazing woman, lots more to her story. Definitely check that one out. And we're going to talk about Susan B. Anthony, who was an important early suffragist, which was a term for advocates for women's right to vote. She also was anti-slavery. So she and her best friend Elizabeth Cady Stanton traveled the country speaking out for women's rights issues. They were great organizers. She unfortunately did not live long enough to see women get the vote in 1920, but she paved the way for generations of women to come. And much more recent history, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who just passed away last year at the age of 87. She became a lawyer in the 1950s when women lawyers were not really welcome. So even though she graduated at the top of her class, which is hard to do because she already had a family, she had trouble finding a job at first. But she went on to argue very important cases for women's rights and men's rights, including before the Supreme Court. And then she was appointed to the Supreme Court in 1993, only the second woman on the Supreme Court, and she served until her recent passing. So she's a great lady who did a lot of good stuff. And then, I don't know about you, but I am crazy about space. So I could not skip the chance to talk about Sally Ride, who was the first American woman in space. Like basically all scientists, and like all astronauts, she was a brilliant scientist. She had a PhD in physics. So she was one of the first class of astronauts that included women. And she went up in 1983 and 1984 in the Space Shuttle Challenger. And then after she retired from NASA, she went on to become a professor of physics. And she created programs that advocated science education for kids, especially for girls, because like many of her generation, she was one of very few women in her classes and often was made to feel very unwelcome. Luckily, nowadays, things are getting better. but it's because of women like her that they are. Speaking of space, we have another great book called Counting on Katherine, How Katherine Johnson Saved Apollo 13. And this is another great picture book with wonderful illustrations, so relatively easy to read. If you grown-ups have read or seen Hidden Figures, you're familiar with Katherine Johnson. She was a brilliant mathematician who worked on the earliest American space flights, calculating trajectories, which is, when it goes up, you have to know where it's going to come down. And if it doesn't come down in the right place, you're in big trouble. So she calculated trajectories for John Glenn's first orbit of the Earth, and he would not go up unless Katherine Johnson checked the numbers for him. He trusted her above anyone else. She worked on the moon landings and Apollo 13, which you may recall, Houston, we have a problem. She calculated on the fly trajectories to get them home safely. So another great story of a cool American woman. And then finally, I'm going to talk about Rosa Parks, a civil rights pioneer. We have several books about her. I picked this one because it is an easy reader, just to show you that we have some of those. And so it's a level 3 reader. So when you're starting to be able to read some, but it's got nice big words and illustrations. Rosa Parks is best known, of course, for refusing to give up her seat on a bus to a white person in Montgomery, Alabama in 1955. This led to a year-long bus boycott, which eventually led to the desegregation of the buses, and eventually bus segregation being declared unconstitutional. After that, she moved to Detroit and was a secretary for many years to Representative John Conyers, who was a pioneering African-American representative, and she helped him advocate for the rights of African Americans. So she was active all through her life in making life better for people. So this barely scratches the surface of the great books we have about women. So I highly encourage you to come in and look around and see what else you can learn about. All right, thanks. See you next week.